Think about what your hands actually say about you. Look at the person beside you, look at their hands, compare your hands to one another. I want you just to think for a second about your hands. What sort of things do they say about you? If you've seen the hands of people in different professions, their hands will say different stories about where they've been. You see carpenters' hands, they're different than, accountants' hands, which are different than, And the way that this, whoa, what did I just do? That's not the right, that's not it. Well, it's Alvin's lovely family, it's not it. Okay, good. Where this became apparent to me was there was a period in my life where I had this sort of ongoing comparison between books versus buses. Let me explain. When I was in university, I was an English major. So I would go through periods, nice, yes. I would go through periods of being in school, doing nothing but reading books. I might get the odd paper cut, I was typing on essays. My hands were like baby soft all the time. That's just how it was, because I didn't do much. I played a little bit of video games and read some books, and my hands stayed soft. In the summers, I would go back home to Brantford, where I'm from, and there was a big school bus factory. Bluebird was there. And so I had a job, and I would work all summer in this Bluebird factory building buses. And what happens when you build buses is there's the job that I was doing, there was lots of exposed like sheet metal and stuff. So my hands would just get like sliced and diced, and I would get calloused, and they would just get beat up. And I could basically tell, apart from being myself and knowing where I was, but I could tell which stage of my life I was in simply by looking down at my hands. Because they were, and when I would go back to school, it would take a month or two, and then my hands would go back to baby soft again, and then we'd carry on through the school year. And then the summer would come, and then they'd get sliced and diced, and it looked like I had been in a bar fight. And then we'd come back around. As I got thinking about this, what I wanted to think about today is how are your hands? What do your hands say about you? And in the context of ministry, what do your hands show the work that you've been doing? Maybe not your physical hands, but we'll say your spiritual hands. I found this verse in Ecclesiastes. It's kind of, I've been wrestling with, and I wanted to share with you today. It's Ecclesiastes 4, 5, and 6. It says, "Fools fold their idle hands, leading them to ruin. And yet better to have one handful of quietness than two handfuls with hard work and chasing the wind." Kind of a strange, profound little verse. But I want to pull some things out of this for us this afternoon, this morning. This verse kind of gives us three different options. At the start, we see fools are folding their idle hands. It's better to have one handful of quiet than two handfuls of hard work and chasing the wind. I want us to kind of break this down and think about these three options together. The first one is this notion of fools folding idle hands. No one wants to be seen as a fool. This isn't really something that you would want to put in your job description. Yes, I am a fool. The idea is that fools fold their idle hands and it leads them to ruin. This isn't really something we aspire to. Other translations of this idea is that we're led to ruin. It also it can be translated as consuming one's own flesh. So you fold your hands idly and you're consuming yourself. The other notion might be the idea of shooting yourself in the foot. The things that we're doing is actually doing more harm than good. And I got thinking about what does this actually look like in a ministry context? What does it look like in a youth ministry context or a ministry context in general? To be known as somebody who's simply folding their idle hands in their laps, leading themselves to ruin. And I got thinking through some ideas. I think sometimes we create distractions to avoid doing anything that actually matters. Sometimes we do a very good job of creating distractions for ourselves. There's things that we just do naturally that we're perhaps good at, and so we waste time. Because we like the things that we like to do, because then we don't have to think about doing anything else that we actually have to do. And sometimes we get caught up doing lots of really good things for all the wrong reasons. And we end up actually creating our own distractions, things that we just want to get done. I think sometimes, and this is where the idle hand bits comes in, sometimes I think we just coast along and we look for shortcuts. I've been at the church that I'm at now, this is my 9th year. And so there's things that I can do because I've been there, and there's things that are just kind of happening. And I could just let it ride, but I realize that's when I get myself in all sorts of trouble as soon as I start to think I actually know what's going on. Sometimes I think we give into the distractions around us. Here's some examples. There's some things that might even be very good tools for youth ministry. Facebook is a great tool to connect with kids. It's a great tool to have, connections and send things around. However, you can be talking to a student and then end up, well, I should probably click on that, which then I should probably click on that. And then you end up, surfing the whole World Wide Web and forgetting why you actually started. We get distracted by things that are around us. These are just some tangible examples of things that we can get ourselves messed up in. I think some other ways that we fold our hands is when we let people walk away from situations or conversations that we should be having. There's moments sometimes I think where we miss embedded potential because of it's too hard or it's too difficult or I have something else to do. I read once about a youth pastor who was trying to find a way to connect with his students. And he was actually working on something, a program, developing a system with which he could connect with the students and actually make deeper relationships with them. A couple of his kids actually showed up outside of his office door. He said hi to them and then actually told them to go away because he was busy working on something. He was working on how to connect with students, and the students were there to connect with them, and he missed it because he was doing something else. I think sometimes we do this sort of thing. We see moments that have potential and we miss them because we've got something else on the go or we're distracted by some of those other things. I think sometimes we also find ourselves in trouble because we put in some effort but not enough. We step into a situation and it might get messy or difficult, and then we start to back out when it doesn't go as planned. This might be, and I've had a few students where they come to you one day asking for help and you give them help and then they don't take it, and then they come back to you the next week asking for the same help and you try it again and they don't take it. And it just becomes this cycle of I'm trying my best and they're not listening and so I'm done. And we get this idea that we try a little bit but not quite hard enough, and we back out. I think sometimes we get frustrated when people don't accept the help that we're offering and so we quit. Maybe people don't always see just how golden or perfect your advice actually is. And so we get frustrated and say, well, if you don't want it, I'm not going to bother giving it to you. I think that the key factor here seems to be not wanting to put in the effort that's required. I think that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is trying to get at with this idea of folding idle hands. And it's for various reasons. And so I think we become no help to people around us. And we can actually damage our own life and our own ministry because we get distracted by other things. We should be doing some good stuff, and we actually miss the real opportunities that God wants us to do because we're doing busy work. We have our plans and our purposes. Just one quick example from my own ministry. We had planned a great trip to go down to a place in New Jersey, in Camden, New Jersey, to an organization called Urban Promise, and we had a team that was going to help build stuff. And we had a team of 10 and adult leaders, and we had funds and all that kind of stuff. For a variety of reasons, two of my adult leaders who were very key in the building process, I don't build anything, I was an English major, they had passport issues and couldn't cross the border. And so we ended up stuck and had to, at the last minute, literally the day before we were supposed to leave, gear change our entire mission trip, and actually ended up hanging out in Toronto and working with a variety of different ministries and that kind of thing. But realizing that we had to be willing to let God do the things that God wanted to do and make the shifts and the moves that we had to make along the way. This is a quote from Thomas Edison. Sometimes opportunity is missed by people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. I think sometimes we have that situation as well. The next thing that I want us to think about, the next idea is that kind of comes in the middle, is that it's better to have one handful with quietness. This is interesting as I was thinking about this. Youth ministry and quietness are not naturally things that go together. If you think about your youth ministry nights, probably quietness is not something that you, unless you're asking them a question. This might not be the thing that first pops into your mind. Typically when we think of quietness, this sort of image comes to mind. Sitting peacefully and serenely at a dock or something. Stillness, calm, and peace. And the reality is that working with students is often far more like this. It seems sometimes like we're simply trying to manage and contain chaos. So how do we have a handful of quietness in the midst of chaos? If the first option is just to kind of give up, fold your hands, and quit, and what it's calling us to is this idea of having one handful of quietness. How do we do that? Let me refer to a quote from a lesser-known theologian. Sometimes it's important for us to learn to work smarter, not harder. To be honest, this is something that I'm still trying to work out for myself. I'm still trying to figure out how this all is. Something that I'm learning not just to do for the sake of doing things. And to think about the activities that I'm involved with. Why am I actually doing these things? Why do I do the stuff that I do? Is there a purpose behind it? Are the things I'm giving my attention to, do they actually fit into the larger goals or strategies that I'm trying to move forward to in my life and in my ministry? The last thing that any of us needs, I think, is more stuff to do. But we need to learn how to do the important stuff, the stuff that actually matters. Perhaps here's a more reliable source than Scrooge McDuck. From Colossians, it says, to live wisely among those who are not believers and to make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversations be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. There's a lot of stuff that's loaded in this passage. The idea of our conversations, are they always gracious and attractive, even with the ones that we're frustrated with? Do we have the right response for people? But what I want to pull out is this idea, this notion of making the most of every opportunity. And my simple question is, for all of us, am I making the most of the opportunities that are presented to us? Are our hands too full of other stuff that we can't actually participate in the things that God is actually trying to do? And this brings us to our last option. When I was thinking about the idea of two handfuls, I don't know whether you've ever watched a strongman competition. It's kind of a pointless endeavor. It's a bunch of guys trying to show how strong they are, which is neat. And I would never say any of this to their face because they can throw me across the room. But this event in particular, if you've seen it, basically they had these great big huge boulders on the ground. And the goal is to pick up the boulder and put it on top of a pillar. And then as they go down the line, the boulders get bigger and heavier and the pillars get higher. And so they're working harder and harder to put this thing on top of the thing. And they're very proud of themselves when they get them all up. What they don't show you is the obnoxious bit that happens afterwards, is where somebody from the event running it comes along with probably a forklift of some kind and takes all the boulders off and puts them right back down on the ground for the next guy. And I got thinking about ministry and the potential for how often do we spend our lives and our time working really hard to get this ball up on top of this pillar, realizing that, you know what, in 10 seconds somebody's just going to come and put this ball back down on the ground for the next guy. Sometimes we put so much energy and effort into things that aren't really going to matter. We spend time and energy and effort and maybe even work at doing good things, but we never actually stop to ask why. We never stop to actually make sure there's a point for the things that we're doing. Ecclesiastes calls us having two handfuls of hard work and chasing the wind. You might also refer to it as running around like a chicken with your head cut off. A lot of us are guilty of this, I think. We're busy. And we sometimes wear our busyness like a badge of honor. I don't know whether you've ever had somebody ask, how you doing? You keeping busy? Right? Well, what are you supposed to say to that? You're supposed to say yes. Imagine if somebody said, are you keeping busy? And you said, no, I am doing hardly anything. Imagine the chair of your deacons board or your senior pastor, are you keeping busy? Nope, I have nothing to do. That would not go so well. We sometimes wear this busyness like a badge of honor, like I have to be more busy because that means I'm doing good things. And we might be, but maybe we're just busy for the sake of being busy. And sometimes this happens to the detriment of our families, to the detriment of ourselves, and even to the detriment of our students, because we model for them this life of busyness where it shows them that you just got to keep working. Why? I don't know, but you've got to do more. Can you slam more into your life? Because I really want you to have a mental breakdown. This is what we don't say, but we model to people. And I just want us to think about those sorts of things. Sometimes I think we get obsessed with being successful. We want to come across well in business meetings and reports, right? If you're writing your annual report and you can only get like 2 paragraphs, well, I'm clearly not doing enough. We want to keep our churches happy. We want to keep the parents of our students happy. We want to keep our students happy. But what I want to ask is why? What are we actually accomplishing? What is success? How do we know when we've got it? What does it look like? I think success is actually a lot messier and harder to find than we want to admit. How do you know tangibly that you've impacted the lives of your students? How do you measure the depth of their relationship with God? I mean, there's not like a blueprint. You can't give them a litmus paper test and say, oh, this student is deeper now. We just have to be aware of what God's doing. You can certainly look for markers, but there's no certainty. And this can actually drive you crazy. And so you work harder, right, to see more results, which makes you drives you more crazy, which means you work harder, which it becomes this cycle. I think part of the reasoning for this can be found here in the verses that come before the verses that I showed you already. It says, then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is meaningless. It's like chasing the wind. I think we do a good job sometimes of looking through the fence and checking out everybody else's grass. Even at a gathering like this, sometimes we size each other up and compare each other's ministry. And we do it sometimes, overtly, sometimes casually. So, how many kids are you getting out to your stuff? So, what programs are you using? Yeah. So, how many adult leaders do you have with your, and it's under this guise of, checking in and saying hi. But we're trying to measure and balance and figure out where we are in the equation of how things actually all fit together. Judging success in our context based on the success of others is not success in our context. I think perhaps if we spend the same energy looking honestly and openly at our own context, we'd be able to see the areas which need to be more watered. I think if we can shift our minds away from saying, I have to have my ministry look like everybody else's, and realize, you know what? God has called me here to this place at this time to do the things that God wants me to do here. And great things are happening over there. God bless them. And actually be genuinely excited and encouraged and fired up about it. So in closing, let me just ask you this question. How are your hands? Out of those three options, if you were to be honest with yourself this morning, are your hands idly folded? Are you doing the stuff that you've always done and you're not sure why? Or are you putting in a halfway effort, just trying to get by? Are your fists clenched tightly? Are you working hard and chasing the wind, doing what you think needs to be done just because you think it needs to be done? Or are we actually full of quietness, learning to let go and to realize that God wants us to be the people that God wants us to be in the places that we're supposed to be? And God has called you to do the things that he wants you to do in the place that he wants you to be at. So that's what I have to share.